onto a topic in the NBA, kind of a puffery piece in a lot of ways, but at the same time, kind of an interesting tidbit of an article. The D'Angelo Russell scandal, as it's being called right now. D'Angelo Russell, a Los Angeles Lakers player from the NBA, has gotten in trouble for posting up a video, or well, not posting, but having a video leaked that he recorded of his fellow teammate Nick Young discussing a bunch of different women, and none of them being his fiancee Iggy Azalea. Now, this has got a bunch of people in an uproar, both, in the teammates and the coaches and fans, and there's talks of possible trades. For me, when it comes to an article like this, it's kind of a non-issue in most respects. The only issue I ever take with it is how it would affect the team's play. I'm not a huge Los Angeles Lakers fan. I'm in LA. Actually, I live in LA, but it's not a team that I follow very closely. And for me, the only concern I would have as an LA Lakers fan is how does it affect my team's play, how they do when they're playing against other teams, and how they do in the tournaments and playoffs and things like that. That's all that would really matter to me in that regard. But there are a lot of people that are really kind of upset about this. There's always the cry of, well, how did the video get leaked? And there's, I don't know. But I don't know. That's kind of my thoughts on this situation. Do you have any kind of take or thoughts as to what's going on with this, Derek?
Um, Here's the thing. What D'Angelo Russell did, I won't say is wrong because I'm not a moralist. What I will say is it was stupid because at the end of the day, whether you agree with this man screwing around on his girlfriend or fiance, I'm sorry, is irrelevant. It's not your business. It's not your place to talk about it. If you do have a close relationship with either Nick Young or his fiance, then it is your prerogative to take it up with them personally. There have been a lot of extramarital issues in professional athletics, and this is far from the first. The problem is now with D'Angelo Russell doing something dumb like a 19, 20-year-old kid would do, like he is the fact that his team is starting to do what's called a freeze out. If you look at his numbers statistically, it looks like it's very clear that his teammates are no longer passing to him. They're no longer setting him up. And he's one of these young guys that are supposed to be a part of this new Los Angeles Lakers rebuild. Frankly, all this talk of trading, I think, honestly, I would trade Nick Young before I trade D'Angelo Russell. Even though he made a mistake, he has the higher upside. He seems to be a good kid. Honestly, I would trade the rest of the team and keep the young players than, trade D'Angelo Russell in an attempt to get this broken team back together. I mean, before this, they were already the last of the last place team in the West. So it's not like getting rid of D'Angelo Russell is going to create any sort of an upside. What you need to do is you need to get rid of your older players, keep your younger players together, and try to build for the future. It's already very clear that this is Kobe's last year. So aside from that, there's nobody on that team I wouldn't be willing to get rid of to get draft picks or other young players to prepare for the future.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, they kind of got to get to the point where they can just put aside the personal issues, solve that off the court, and then when it comes back to the court, you need to just focus on the game, focus back with your teammates, and not let it affect you on that side of things because that's going to just ruin your careers potentially and your seasons. So,
Yeah.
okay. Well, it was an interesting article. I mean, things like this, like you said earlier, always pop up in athletics and professional sports, but there's just a lot of people making issue with it, and so we've talked about that now, and actually we're going to move into another topic here, into Derek's wheel well, the UFC. Now this is what we're going to call Derek's ranting hour here. He is going to go on a rant a little bit here. We're going to talk about an issue in the UFC, some background pertaining to it, and what's happening. This issue all involves the fighter Jon Jones. So anybody out there who knows who Jon Jones is might know what's going on with him. But we're going to give Derek a little bit of time here to kind of talk about his back history, what's going on now, what's going to happen in the future, and the whole issue surrounding all of it.
Okay. I'm going to start off with. I'm going to go on a while here, but I'm going to start off with the most important thing about Jon Jones, in that he is probably the most gifted athlete I've ever seen in my life. and that means all sports. I've seen Kobe Bryant play basketball at his peak. I've seen Tom Brady, win 4 Super Bowls. I have never seen an athlete, forget fighter, athlete, dominate the way Jon Jones has dominated these last 6-7 years. It's very interesting because he came in at a time when the UFC's light heavyweight division was a little bit of turmoil. They were playing hot potato with the belt because it was such a some people had referred to the light heavyweight division as the Shark Tank because of how in depth it was. But 2011, Jon Jones comes in, smashes Mauricio Shogun Rua, beats Rashad Evans, beats Quinton Jackson, beats Lyoto Machida, beats Chael Sonnen, beats Dan Henderson, beats Lyoto Machida again, beats Vitor Belfort, beats everybody who could possibly stand in his way. I could go on. Gustafsson, Teixeira, Cormier, who we're going to talk about in a little bit here. He not only did he beat all of these fighters, he smashed them. He demolished them. He was so far and away the number one fighter in the world, it wasn't even funny. And part of me thinks that was part of the problem that created his own destruction. It seems to happen with the elite of the elite. It happened with Mike Tyson way back in the day, where you were just so great and it got to the point where you didn't really have to train as hard. You didn't have to focus on the game as hard. And eventually your body slowly but surely wore down to the point where you became vulnerable. In 2015, Jon Jones was supposed to fight Anthony Rumble Johnson at UFC 187. However, on April 28th, he was stripped of the belt indefinitely because of a hit and run incident where he avoided. He left the scene. Actually, he came back to the scene to retrieve money and drugs, which is wonderful. He had already been tested positive in his previous fight for cocaine. Jon Jones had then proceeded to check himself into rehab and then check himself out after a day. And it just seemed like there was this terrible swirl for the greatest fighter that, at least in my generation. The man he recently beat, Daniel Cormier, stepped in for Jon Jones in that fight that Jones was supposed to take, and he won the belt. On October 23rd, 2015, the UFC announced that Jon Jones had been reinstated to the active roster after nearly 6 months of suspension. The reason for this is that a lot of people close to Jones had told Dana White and the Fertitta brothers that he had turned his life around and he had figured things out and he was back on track. And the rematch between him and Daniel Cormier, probably the biggest rematch in the last 10 years, is set for April 23rd, 2016. And Jones was going to get a chance to get his life back. Fast forward to just a week ago. Jon Jones gets pulled over for drag racing. Now, honestly, whether he was drag racing or he wasn't, I would almost say is irrelevant because he says he didn't. Cop says he did. You can't. There's no video showing this, so you don't really know. What I can say is the way that he reacted in his language, his demeanor, and the things he said to this cop were so not acceptable. It's not even funny. You are the best in the world. And you have a chance. You get something most people only dream of. You get a second chance to be the best in the world. You have a second chance to stand on top of the world and say, "Come at me, bro." And you have lost your focus. You've lost grip with reality. You suddenly believe you are bigger than the world. You think you're bigger than the law. You think that that things do not apply to you when clearly they do. I'm very hesitant to believe all these reports that Jon Jones has turned his life around. I have a hard time believing that he's finally on the right track. And, we'll see. Sooner or later, we'll see if Jon Jones really has gotten his stuff together. Uh, they did they did find a marijuana pipe in there, but no other drugs were found. Again, I'm not a moralist, but at least it's not cocaine. At least he didn't hit anybody. But we'll see. We will see. And you know what? Thank God for Rashad Evans. I'll just say this. Thank God for Rashad Evans choosing to take this fight on short notice with Daniel Cormier, since Jon Jones is now not going to be able to fight because of these legal issues. Thank God for Rashad Evans.
Derek, it says I'm not the UFC guy here, but I'm pretty sure that was an April Fool's joke. I don't think that's actually happening.
But I read it on the internet. Everything you read on the internet is true, right?
Well, I think we'll have to do a little bit better fact checking for our next episode, but I don't quite think you're right on that one. I actually am going to move into another topic here really quick. I want to bring up now that I think about it. Um, I am going to move into the topic. Actually, we discussed it a little bit before the
Mm-hmm.
podcast here, and it has to do with women's soccer. Um, the National Women's Soccer League for America, for the U.S., they are paid a substantial less amount of money, and I can't remember the exact percentage. You can correct me on that in a minute here. They are paid a substantial less amount of money compared to the U.S. men's soccer team, and they actually make a substantial bit more money in revenue than the men's soccer team does. And there's kind of a big uproar going on with that right now, and it goes back to the collective bargaining deal they had a few years ago in the NFL. And I'm kind of curious as to what your thoughts are, and what you know, maybe you can fill in a few of the details as well as to what's going on in this situation.
Well, it's 1/4. It's 25% of what the men make, which is insulting. Um, Honestly, the fact of the matter is, this happens a lot in athletics, not usually with the whole organization, but you hear about this all the time. You hear about a basketball player who had a great rookie year and now he's going to hold out on his contract. You hear about a great NFL player who had a great second year in the NFL, a second year on his 8-year deal, and he wants to redo his contract. Do I think the women are worth more? Yes, absolutely. I think they're worth more. At the same time, they signed the CBA. They signed on the dotted line, and it'll be this deal will be up at the end of this year. While I think it's bogus, I think you still signed on the dotted line, and you have a contractual obligation to fill out that contract. Choosing to sue, I don't think is exactly the right course of action. I understand why, because they're trying to point and say, look at us. We're being paid so much less and we make so much more. And if you just look at those two things, absolutely, it's outrageous. But you dig a little deeper, you realize they signed a contract that defined their pay.
Right. And that makes sense. I mean, why are they I mean, I don't even understand why they'd be choosing to sue now. If the contract's up at the end of this year, they can renegotiate that contract and get their wages on a more equal and fair balance to the revenue they generate. So I guess that the reasoning for suing now is kind of odd.
Well, they did actually. This is actually an older story. I just found out about it a couple of days ago, but they had actually back in January threatened to sue if things had not changed. So this has been a kind of, it got to a certain point. I can't remember what the exact deadline was, but it was sometime in March where they said, okay, this is not acceptable. We're going to sue.
Yeah, I mean, even in January, though, to bring that up as an ultimatum of, you know, whatever you want to call it, it's still only at that point a year away until you can renew your contract. I mean, you have that year, you have that time to get your stats and your facts together, and then you'll be able to make a really strong case. The contract renegotiation comes around, and you can make that better money, you know, and hold out for it. Whereas, you know, you're going into litigation now in March. Litigation on something of this scale can take months to years, even. I mean, what's the thought process there when you only have in March at that point you only have seven, or I mean, sorry, not seven, but 9 months left to go.
I I don't know, but I think the thought process is there's a lot of these soccer players are in their prime and some are even a little past their prime. So maybe they're thinking they don't have a lot of time left. They
That
don't have another year or two. I'm not saying your logic is flawed at all. I'm just saying like that's my best guess.
Yeah, and that could make sense. I guess people want to get their money before potentially leaving the system. And I don't know what the turnaround is on soccer players, but especially, you know, at that national level. But I mean, if it's short-lived, then it could make sense in that regard. But it was just kind of a curious piece of news that I was it was interesting because of that short period of time when they really, I don't know, didn't see the point of suing at this point. So